right. Are we on?
Yes.
We are on, and it would appear, if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to jinx anything, it would appear that today Facebook's working, whereas last night it was absolutely all over the shop. Anyway, welcome to the One Finger at a Time piano lesson, volume 400,729.6. 11. Oh, sorry, close. And it's been fun doing this thing. And I hope there's people out there who are still enjoying it and actually getting to play a little bit of piano. As I said on one of the previous ones, it's hard to know exactly where to pitch this technique-wise or difficulty level-wise, because, of course, some people are starting totally from scratch and some people already play a little bit. So I hope I'm not boring those people who are virtuosos, and I hope I'm not making it too challenging for people who are just getting started, for whom music and the piano are a wonderful new playground to romp in. A wonderful playground, but a challenging one, because it's not easy. And the secret, I think, is if you're starting out and you're finding it difficult, is not to worry. Practice is important, and it's my challenge to try and find things that that you can pick up fairly easily and that you can then expand on if you're so inclined. My way I play, the stuff I started to learn on the piano was New Orleans rhythm and blues. It's not a style that I came to later after having spent years as a jazz pianist or as a classical pianist. I started out playing New Orleans R&B, and so that's kind of what I do and what I'm hardwired to do. And good thing about New Orleans R&B piano or blues piano, but New Orleans R&B is more fun, is that you can make some pretty hip sounds without having to be, Rachmaninoff or Liberace or Lady Gaga. So today we're going to look at some boogie woogie. And what's interesting about this style, this is early New Orleans. It's kind of a style you find in 1940s and early 50s New Orleans rhythm and blues, and some R&B from other parts of the country too. But it's a sound that a lot of people associate with New Orleans. And I'll play a little. This is kind of what I was playing when we started this. So if you want to get complicated with it, it can be like this. If you want to... Oh, sorry, I'm under a strict observation here from she who must be obeyed at all times to get the microphone out of the way when I'm playing.
And your hat's kind of in the way, too. No,
Well,
it's
all right,
move
okay,
it
look,
back,
I'll figure it out.
Keep going, mic back, more back. There you
Well, I'm about to
go.
talk, so I'll put the mic back in a minute. Two things are going on. New Orleans R&B, a la Roy Brown, and also an element of what went on to become very popular in Jamaica and was taken by young Jamaican musicians when they copied New Orleans stuff and turned into a style called ska. And ska became, over the years, slowed down and became rock steady. And over a few more years, that slowed down and became reggae. And I'll give you a quick example. So the left hand, I'm just going to give you an example, then we can actually get down and figure out how to play it. But check it out. This is the left hand. And donk. It's doing that, basically. But the thumb is doing chatting, 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 scatting, 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 scat. And the right hand plays the same thing. And you get, in Jamaica they call it ska, because that was what the part sounded like. The guitar players were going scat, 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 and the organ player scat, scat. If I just slow that down to give you an example of how it turns into reggae. So that's how reggae evolved, and it comes out of this. So this is what we're going to look at. So one finger at a time, we're going to start with the thumb. Middle C, to the left of the two black notes. We're going to play a C major chord. If you remember, this is the key that we've been doing most of these lessons in, because it's a really easy key to start in. It's like a good launching pad. So C major, and then play a C in the bass here, like with one finger. That's a C in the same position, an octave lower as the C, and then go down one more, all the way down to here. So there's a C. So look at the notes that you're playing in C. It's 3 notes that make up C major. And now in your left hand, do that, what I just did. Play them one, C, E, and then sneeze all over the keyboard.
That's disgusting.
It is kind of disgusting. Play a C chord with your left hand. It's the same as this one. You'll notice when you play it, it sounds kind of muddy down there in the bass. Chords don't really work so well in that territory. But we're not going to play a chord. We're just going to play the individual notes. And the individual notes, we'll play them with one finger if you like. C. Now go. So you hit one note and then play with your right hand, left hand, right hand. And we're going to play this melody. The notes you're playing in the left hand are the same notes that you're playing in the right hand. They're just lower down the keyboard, but they fit because they're the same. So it all sounds in tune. The actual notes are C, E, G, and then we're going to keep going, go to A, and then C, and then back down again. So try it very slowly. You alternate. So you can practice that and play it slowly, and then just try slowly speeding it up. And when you do speed it up, the important thing to try and develop, and it takes time, but is you've got to make it swing. That's what makes it sound good. It makes people want to dance. So when you do play it at the regular speed, it's going to sound, it's going to have a slight lilt, and it's going to go. Okay, so that's C. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing in F. C, D, E, F. There's the note of F, and we're going to play the chord of F. So there's the chord of F, and the same thing, play F with your left hand, and then go down an octave lower. You can even go lower than that if you like, it's up to you. And of course, the more bassy it sounds, the tougher it sounds. Some people when they're starting find that it's hard to coordinate if your hands are very far apart. So if you find it easier to go here, then do it there. But the same thing we just did in C, we're going to do in F. After a while, it starts to calm. You'll find it gets easier, and you can start doing it. You can get slightly more on kind of automatic pilot, so you're not really thinking and looking too much, but you're starting to feel the music. And then the third stage is to do the same thing again, but this time in G. So there's a G chord, and there's a G on the bass. So here we go, same thing again. Check that one. The relative positions of the notes that you play are exactly the same in C as they are in F and as they are in G. So it's as if you only have to learn this thing one time and then just migrate your fingers up to F and to G, and you're essentially doing the same thing. The distance between the keys is the same. So really, you only have to learn it once, but of course it seems more complicated than that. But there, in C, F, and G, you have the three building blocks of some of the greatest early rock and roll and R&B tunes. And one of the reasons that style took off was because it wasn't hard for young people who were just learning to play to emulate the big hits of the day if they could sit down behind a piano, and you could sing a song without having to be a dazzling pianist, and you could rock a room, and get the attention of the girls or the fellas, whatever your preference was, and you could get kudos and prestige. They thought you were hip, and that's kind of the reason a lot of people are drawn to playing music. Everybody wants to be hip.
And get girls.
And get girls. And get free beers. And stay out all night. Come staggering in at 6 o'clock in the morning. And you don't have to talk to anybody, which for me was one of the most appealing aspects of the whole thing. So, but no, it's nice to be able to entertain some people. So you play a boogie woogie. Okay, so just to recap where we're at now. 3 chords, C, F, and G. And in each of those 3 chords, we're doing the same basic thing, to play a boogie woogie. One of the ways of playing a boogie woogie. Anyway, so let's recap once again. C. Chord of C major in the right hand, and we're going to alternate between the left hand and the right hand and go like this. Now go to F. Now go back to C. Now go to G. One time. Then F. Then C. Stay on C. Do it all again. Stay on C. 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, F. 6, 2, 3, 4, C, 2, 3, 4, 7, 2, 3, 4, G, 2, 3, 4. What we just played was a 12-bar blues, 12 bars. So that's the thing, the challenging thing, is to do it enough to know when to change chords from one to the other. And that's not quite as easy as you think. But the best thing to do is if you learn a song. And that's an easier way of telling you when the chords change. And what I didn't do and what I should do is actually try and go on YouTube and find an example of an old New Orleans R&B tune that does this, that's in C, so you can put it up and play along to it. But for example, Roy Brown was one of the first R&B artists to have a hit record out of New Orleans, and he cut a tune called Good Rocking Tonight, which was kind of risque at the time, but it was a revolutionary new sound that blew everybody away. And so, well, have you heard the news? There's good rocking tonight. Now we're going to go to F. Have you heard the news? Now there's good rocking tonight. G. actually going to have to find another example, because his Good Rocking Tonight, as I was playing it, I realised isn't a 12-bar blues. They've got an extra little thing in there. But, you know, flip, flop, and fly. I'm gonna flip, flop, and fly. I don't care if I die. F. I'm gonna flip, flop, and fly. And I don't care if I die. G. Don't ever leave me. F. Don't ever say C goodbye. Let's do it again. I'm gonna slow it down. Well, I'm starting to see 1, 2, 3. Well, have you heard the news? There's good rock and the night stay at sea. Now we're gonna change to F up here. Flip, flop, and fly. C, don't care if I die. G, well now don't ever leave me, baby. F, don't ever say goodbye. That's a very basic form. You can see here in the right hand, you have the prototype for ska, Jamaican music that ended up over the course of 20 years slowing down and becoming reggae. And you can make this, once you've got the basic pattern down, you can improve on it, you can make it better. And one way is to, instead of playing with one finger, that sounds good, but if you do it with your finger and your thumb, and even if you go lower down here, you can get a much bigger bass sound. And bass is always good. Everyone likes more bass. So if you do that, it's a little bit more of a challenge, but it's not that big of a challenge. You're still essentially doing the same thing. You're just doing it with two fingers an octave apart, and it goes like this. It'll sound like this. So you can keep building and adding nuance to this very basic thing. Let's look at the right hand chord. All the way now, up till now, we've been playing the first shape of each chord, which is good. It's like real meat and potatoes, basic chord. But as we said in previous lessons, you can play this chord and arrange the notes in 3 ways, each of which has a slightly different personality. That's the very basic one. To my ears, it often sounds a little bit harsh. Nothing wrong with it, and that's a good shape to use in certain. Sometimes that's what you need, is a bold statement. But if you take this note, and instead of having it on the bottom of the chord, change your fingering so this note's actually at the top of the 3 notes. That's, as we said in an earlier lesson, called the first inversion. You've just inverted the chord. You've inverted the sequence of the notes. And if you play that, you can hear that it has a different quality. The reason for that is that the note in the middle gets a bit buried. And each of the 3 notes has a certain personality. And what you hear as a chord is the sum total of the 3 different personalities of each note. And so the notes that are on either side are exposed, and so your ear hears them more clearly. And it's a very subjective thing. And when I was a little kid growing up, I found it easy to process and remember these things because I assigned to these notes personalities, ages, genders, colors sometimes. Some were soft, some were round, some were spiky, some were old, some were masculine, some were feminine. And that was an easy way for a little kid of 6 or 7 years old to remember where to put the fingers. Now, everyone's different, so there's no point in me explaining those to you, but you can hear by example. Listen to the 3 inversions. Here's C major. It's basic C major. It's called a C major triad because there's 3 notes. The first inversion has this, what I think of as being the more feminine, the more sensitive note, prominently exposed on the outside at the bottom. This note is the key to the emotion of the chord and is more sensitive because you can change it by 1 note and make it a minor chord, a sad chord. The second inversion is the same 3 notes, but this time with the C in the middle and the G exposed, and the sensitive note is now an octave higher on the top, if you see that. Before we had it here, now we're voicing it up here. So they're each different, and the next thing, if you're practicing this and trying to learn, is practice it with the meat and potatoes C. Okay, and now play it in the second inversion. Just listen how different it sounds. It's very subtle. Now do one more time, go up to the second inversion. And you can keep doing that all the way down the keyboard. So it's a good practice to get used to playing these inversions and go all the way up. That's in C. Now do the same thing in F. Start with the basic F triad, and then look at the chord, look at the shape you're playing, and then just very logical. Think logically. I want to play the next inversion, so the lowest note is going to be now to be changed and be made the highest note of the chord. So instead of this F, we're going to play this F up here. So here's the first one, second one, and do the same thing. And then we're going to do the same thing for G. Okay, and then practice playing this little boogie woogie pattern. And then do it with the second inversion. And then try doing it with this one here. And then, as I say, do that with the other chords. So now when you play, if you start doing it and get familiar with the shapes, you can introduce some diversity and some extra colour that makes it more interesting. It makes it sound more like a professional piano player. And you'll find then that certain inversions of a chord going to certain inversions of the next chord aren't as big of a jump. So for example, this inversion of C transitions very nicely to this inversion of F because your fingers aren't moving very much, and that's really what you want in music, is to be able to play the chords in all the different shapes and different inversions so that when you're playing a song you can get to the nearest version without moving around too much. Otherwise, if you're always playing in first positions, it gets jerky and lumpy, and so you want to be able to start getting familiar. And I'm just playing there with the different varieties. You have 3 shapes, just positioning the 3 notes of C and of F and of G, and get familiar with those. Get the rhythm, make it sound beefier by trying to get used to playing octaves in the bass and make that sound tough. In fact, I'm going to put up on I'll put up on Facebook a link to an early Jamaican R&B record by a piano player who had the best name, Theophilus Beckford. And it's not Easy Skanking or Easy Jamming, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's playing this basic pattern. So that's something to work on. You can get a lot more sophisticated and a lot more complicated. And it's time to wind up this lesson. A question.
Yeah. Debbie Norman Robbins says, what's the best fingering on the left hand to minimize having to jump around?
For this particular exercise, this boogie one, this bass line is called a walking bass. And that's the extent of the jumping around. If you're playing left hand accompaniment to your right hand in a song, any number of different songs, then the notes you choose on your left hand will be a result of decisions made by you as a piano player, and will depend largely on your familiarity with chord shapes. And if you're good with your chord shapes and your inversions, then you can select bass patterns that walk and move very elegantly. But quite often in the left hand, the job is a bit different from the job of the right hand, much in the same way as the job of a bass player in a band is different. And generally speaking, what the bass does is it tells you in no uncertain terms what chord it is that's being played, and the best way of doing that is to play what's called the root note. So if your guitar player is playing a C chord, then generally the bass player will play a C note on the bass. And when you go to an F chord, guess what? The bass player plays an F. And that's usually the best efficient way of making the overall song sound good. But a bass can, in theory, play the second or the first inversion or the second inversion too. And that's kind of very clever when you do that, if you do it tastefully. And it really, your choice depends largely on what's coming up next. So, for example, if you were going to play a chord progression that went from C to F, very basic, crude example, then the bass player normally would play C to F. But, check this out, he doesn't have to. And if an alternative sounds better or creates a feeling that works really well, then do it. And this, I'll give you an example. Instead of playing C to F, don't play a C on the bass. Even though it's a C chord, look at the notes you're playing in your right hand. You could play any one of those on the bass and it's still right. But that's a choice you'll largely make. Here's another one, E. Depending on what's coming up. And quite often, the bass player will do that as a way of creating a sense of anticipation in the ear of the listener. A signal that says, we're about to go to a different chord, and I'm giving you a clue where it's going. And it goes by very quickly, but what you're doing in essence is giving a clue, and then when the listener hears it, and hears what they were expecting to hear, they get a very pleasing sense of reward. It's like, I knew that was going to happen. And so this is a tool that's used, for example, in gospel music, and I'll give you an example. And you can build up tension and suspense. And, 'cause, 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 ' this example, we just played the same chords we played before. It's only C and F, but I'm playing a different inversion in the right hand. And instead of playing a C in the bass, I'm playing an E, which is just one of the notes, one of the three notes that make up a C major chord. But it suggests, especially in this inversion here, that is coming up. And when it does, it gives you a lift. And it gives you a sense of forward motion. It guides the listener through the twists and turns of the chord progression if it's done cleverly and tastefully. And so you can get... So here's a C chord, but now I'm playing the G in the bass. And the bass has just told a story. It could have just gone... Hear the difference between this most basic meat and potatoes version and now using the inversions. And that's the basic template behind one of the famous Weather Report jazz tune. So, and a lot of gospel music. So I'm going to leave you, it's that time, but I'm going to play one chorus of real basic, and then I'm going to play one chorus where using a lot of extra tricks that you learn as you get better. But can't run before you can walk. So this is one step at a time. And so here it is, what we just did today. Starting with the most basic. All right. Practice, practice, practice.
Or you'll never get to Carnegie Hall.
All right, thanks for tuning in. I should tell you that you can go on the link to the PayPal stuff for those of you who are generous enough to leave a little thing there. You can also join the newsletter, and it's free, and we've been sending out some extra little stuff, bits and pieces. And I think next week also we're going to start up our Patreon site. I say we, me and our team of hardened professional camera operatives.
That's right.
And the Patreon site, if you're not sure what it is, you click on Patreon and you can go on the internet and find out. But I think that'll give me a platform where I can actually show people some more complicated stuff, or perhaps more specific things. But that's very exciting. So that's going to be next week, I believe. So keep posted and sign up for the newsletter, and there'll be more information about it there. Thank you very much, and keep practicing. Tuesday,
yeah.
Quarantine Hour, assuming that bloody Facebook works, doesn't crash out
night.
like it didn't last night. But next Tuesday, I've got my old friend who's one of the legends of New Orleans rhythm and blues that's still doing it at the age of 82, I believe, something like that. James Rivers, the old piano player from Huey Smith and the Clowns, is going to be here to tell some stories and join me in playing some music on his tenor saxophone. I did ask him to bring his bagpipes. He's New Orleans' greatest R&B bagpipes player. That was one of his. I've got an old poster from 30 years ago. James Rivers, one of the world's greatest blues bagpipe artists. But he said, nah, I don't want to bring that too loud. I said, all right, don't worry about it. Just bring yourself, bring you and your horn. So James Rivers, Tuesday at 8 o'clock New Orleans time. Thank you very much. And see you Tuesday. Cheers.